Ladies and gentlemen, the battle over the body of the former Zambian President Edgar Lungu has turned the Pretoria High Court into the stage for one of the most unusual constitutional dramas Southern Africa has ever seen. Judgment has been reserved and the whole region is waiting to hear whether a widow's private wishes can outweigh a nation's sovereign right to bury its former head of state. Before I continue with the commentary, I would like to sincerely apologize for the silence over the past few days. I have not been feeling well and needed some time to recover. Your support means the world to me, and I know how much you count on Zimwaves TV for sharp, fearless commentary and timely updates. Thank you for your patience and understanding during this short break. We are back on track and you can expect more of the powerful stories, in-depth analysis and no holds barred commentary you love from Zimwaves TV. Stay tuned, the next uploads are coming soon. Don't forget to keep sharing, liking and subscribing. Your support keeps this platform alive. Back to our story. The Lungu family, led by former First Lady Esther Lungu, came to court armed with two weighty arguments. First, their legal team insisted that under South African law, you cannot make a contract over a corpse. A body is not a commodity. In their view, once a person dies, control over their remains lies with the closest family, in this case, the widow. This is not a small point. South African courts have long held that the right to decide on burial belongs to the family, not outsiders. Their second line of argument is even more delicate. Which law should apply? Since Lungu died in South Africa, his family argues that South African law and therefore Esther Lungu's constitutional rights must take precedence. They say it is unsettling for a foreign government, in this case Zambia, to walk into a South African court and demand rulings based on Zambian law. From their perspective, this is a dangerous precedent, allowing foreign constitutions to override South African sovereignty inside South African borders. Add to this the emotional argument. A grieving widow should not be sidelined by cold political interests. The arguments are not without force. They highlight a tension between personal rights, family grief, and the broader public interest. And they will resonate with anyone who has ever fought to honor the wishes of a loved one.
The corpse is not a max. And then you have the party, one of the parties in South Africa as well, concluding that contract. Now you then have to ask yourself, what is the jurisdiction that has the closest connection to that suit? Then it becomes South Africa. And the law in South Africa is clear. There is an autonomous right on the part of the widow to decide what to do with the bones of their husband. Now we said these things are controversial in our law. They are also emotive, but they are also unsettled legal principles. The MTN case shows us that they are unsettled. MTN is now before the Constitutional Court. Leave to appeal was applied for. But the issue has still not been settled about how to resolve a lex loci dispute in the sphere of contract. And what is the role of the Constitution in a lex loci dispute? It is not correct that the lower courts should have a final say on the matter. What is correct is that disputes like this must be finalized by the Supreme Court of Appeal. We were hoping that we could speed this thing up and get to the Constitutional Court sooner. We've been told we must start here. That's fine, we accept that. But the question of principle remains. This is a complex legal question. It has not been resolved before. It's the first case we are aware of where a foreign state comes here to claim the bones of a deceased person contrary to the wishes of the wife. It's the first case that we are aware of.
I'll give you
I am now-
5 minutes.
I started at 10:53.
Okay.
I thought-
So I'll give you another 5 minutes to.
Yes. Yes, so that's why we say this is a matter that should go to the Supreme Court of Appeal.
But here is where the Zambian government's position as defended in the earlier judgment carries the day. Lungu was not a private citizen. He was a president, a national figure, and by Zambia's constitution, his memory and burial are matters of public interest. Section 177 makes it clear. National duty and sovereignty comes first. The earlier full bench ruling found there was an enforceable understanding that Zambia would be his final resting place. And it ruled that personal wishes cannot outweigh the interest of the nation. The Pretoria bench also understood the significance of this ruling. This is not a decision by a single judge that can be quietly ignored. It was delivered by 3 judges, giving it elevated weight for the future. And the principles at stake will ripple far beyond Zambia. If families could forever override governments in burying leaders, then states would lose the ability to honor, reconcile, or even reckon with their own history. And this is the argument that Advocate Tembeka Nkaitobi is also bringing back in court, saying if this judgment is allowed to stand, then this judgment will be a precedent for future cases, and it can as well be applied on South Africans, where the law says different about national interests versus family interests in the event of a death of a national figure.
If in a case such as the present one, the government of Zambia approaches this court seeking the repatriation of the body of its late president under circumstances where that president was not domiciled at the time of death in this country, he was only temporarily present here, and he was a person of national significance.
And do you know whether the family was permanently here?
On the papers,
On the papers.
on the papers, it is stated that they are temporarily in the country. So those factors should be considered to determine which law would apply, and we will submit that the court correctly applied the connecting factors, considered the connecting factors, and correctly came to the conclusion that the burial rights fall to be determined in terms of Zambian law. So my learned friend's submissions that when Foot and Groot discussed the matter of the burial of a corpse and how a corpse should be treated, it deals with the right to bury, which is what this agreement is all about, and which is what the Zambian law is all about. It is not to deal with a corpse per se. It concerns the burial right, and that's what the parties contracted about, and that's also what Zambian law is concerned with. We contend, or what we submit is, if you take this principle that the SCA made clear, is that when you talk about burial rights, you need to look at what law of burial rights would be a choice of law rule of general application. And if you're uncertain, you need to look at the connecting factors that may oust or that may lead to a different law to be applicable. And we say in this case, to the extent that there may be doubt as to the existence or the content of the law relating to burial rights, then you must look at the connecting factors. So it takes you to that second leg, and this court with respect, in paragraph 26, quite correctly concluded with reference or after consideration of those connecting factors that Zambian law must apply. So we submit that as far as the choice of law issue is concerned, that no other court would reasonably conclude that a different outcome should be arrived at. And in any event, even if South African law were to apply, the conclusion would be the same. And that is that the Zambian government would have the burial right. And that is the clear right that the applicant, that the respondent relies on in the founding papers. It says, I have a right to bury. And the fact that the late president is in South Africa does not detract from that right. And that right can be enforced in this country. There's nothing sinister about the government turning to the South African courts to enforce a right that it has in terms of Zambian law, and ultimately also in terms of South African law.
So the court is stuck between two truths: the family's rights, emotional and constitutional, and the state's rights, sovereign and symbolic. It is no wonder that judgment has been reserved. This is not a simple fight about a grave, but a clash of legal systems, national pride, and human grief. Zambia has, however, the stronger claim. Edgar Lungu led the nation, shaped its laws, and represented it abroad. In life, he belonged to Zambia. In death, he still does. His family's pain is real, but it cannot cancel out the collective rights of millions of Zambians to bring their leader home, drape him in the flag, and lay him to rest on his native soil. Anything else would fracture Zambia's story, and the state cannot allow that. This case will almost certainly make its way higher up, maybe even to the Constitutional Court. But whatever the outcome, it has already exposed a question Southern Africa has never confronted before. When leaders die abroad, who gets the final word, the family or the state? For Zambia, the answer seems clear. A president is not just a husband or a father. He is history, and history must come home. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be watching as this legal drama unfolds, because in Southern Africa, even funerals are political theater. So don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe now and stay with us.